He kept vanishing into the neighbor's yard, carrying something in his mouth. His owner thought it was mischief, until he followed him one night. What he saw would break his heart and reveal a secret buried in silence: a German shepherd, a group of abandoned puppies, and a truth no one saw coming. Why was he doing this? What was he trying to protect? Before we begin, comment below where in the world you're watching from. The wind hissed through the narrow alleys of Alderwick, rattling loose shutters and sending fallen leaves skittering across the cracked pavement. From his worn armchair near the living room window, Luca Reinhardt watched the world retreat into sleep. The 42-year-old former homicide detective had the rugged, weathered look of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. His brown hair was flecked with gray at the temples, trimmed in no-nonsense fashion. Years in the field had sculpted his frame lean but solid. His broad shoulders slightly hunched now from a habitual wariness he could never quite shake. His face, framed by a faint dusting of stubble, bore permanent lines carved by loss. A ghost of grief lingering in the sharp set of his jaw, a shadow in his deep-set blue eyes. At his feet lay Falco, his 5-year-old German shepherd and former canine partner. Falco was a picture of disciplined strength, his black and tan coat gleaming even in the dim light, his ears sharply alert. He had the broad chest, keen eyes, and tightly coiled energy of a working dog who had never truly retired. Though his badge had been removed, Falco's sense of duty remained, beating in time with the steady rhythm of Luca's own wounded heart. It was near midnight when Falco stirred. Luca barely noticed at first: the quiet scratch of claws on the hardwood, the soft chuff of breath, until the faint click of the back door caught his ear. He snapped to full alertness, heart kicking against his ribs. Rising silently, he moved toward the kitchen. The back door, an old thing of heavy oak and iron fixtures, hung open by a few inches. The chill of the autumn night seeped through the gap. Before Luca could call out, Falco reappeared from the shadows of the backyard, trotting briskly into the kitchen with something held carefully in his jaws. Luca froze, mouth slightly open in stunned disbelief. Cradled between Falco's teeth was a tiny, shivering bundle. A puppy, mud-caked and trembling, with no collar around its scrawny neck. Its fur, a matted patchwork of tan and black, revealed it as a young Belgian Malinois, barely 8 weeks old. Falco set the puppy down with tender precision, stepping back but keeping his body low, his intense eyes flicking between Luca and the little creature as if awaiting judgment. The puppy collapsed onto the floor, its frail body racked by shivers, a faint whimper escaping its cracked lips. A jagged gash marred its left hind leg, crusted with dirt and blood. Kneeling beside it, Luca ran his hands gently over the tiny form, feeling every protruding rib beneath the grimy fur. His cop instincts warred with his battered soul. Someone had abandoned this creature to die, and somehow Falco, who had once chased down criminals with the same unrelenting drive, had sniffed it out and brought it home. Falco whined low in his throat, nudging the puppy's side with his nose. Luca exhaled sharply, scooping the pup into his arms. Its heartbeat fluttered against his chest like a dying moth. He glanced down at Falco, who sat obediently now, eyes dark pools of quiet urgency. "You're not losing your mind, are you, boy?" Luca murmured, half to himself. Falco's tail gave a soft, single thump on the floor, but his gaze remained steady, fierce with some silent understanding. As he cleaned the wound and warmed milk for the puppy, Luca's mind turned to a conversation he'd overheard 2 days ago. Dr. Mila Fauer, the young veterinarian who had recently opened a clinic 2 blocks over, had mentioned during a neighborhood meeting that an unusual number of puppies were being found abandoned near her practice. Mila, 28, was small and slight, with sharp green eyes and a waterfall of chestnut hair usually tied in a loose braid down her back. She moved through the world with a quick, purposeful stride, often dressed in practical jeans and thick sweaters, bearing an air of stubborn compassion. People in Alderwick said she had come from Lyon after a scandal at a wildlife rescue center, a misplaced trust that had cost her deeply, leaving her with an ingrained wariness towards bureaucracy but an unshakable devotion to the creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Mila's words drifted back to him now. "Somebody's trying to clean the streets, Officer Reinhardt, and not in a way you'd approve." Luca cradled the puppy closer, feeling the warmth seep back into its tiny body. A tight knot formed in his gut. His hands, once steady enough to aim down a rifle scope under fire, trembled as he wrapped the pup in a fleece blanket. Falco lay a few feet away, his chin resting on his paws, but his eyes never strayed from the fragile life he had rescued. The next morning, Alderwick woke under a veil of mist. Luca carried the puppy to Mila's clinic, the battered building barely distinguishable behind the creeping fog. A hand-painted sign swung crookedly above the door. Faure Veterinary Care, every life matters. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and wet fur clung to the air. Mila glanced up from behind the reception desk, the fatigue in her features sharpening into alert concern when she saw Lucas step through carrying the bundle. She ushered him into the back room without a word, her small frame moving with surprising authority. As she examined the puppy, her hands deft, voice a constant low murmur of reassurance, Luca explained how Falco had brought the little one home. Mila's face darkened, her lips pressing into a hard line. "You're not the only one," she said quietly, probing the wound on the puppy's leg with a frown. "This is the third abandoned puppy I've seen this week. Same age, same condition, no microchips. It's deliberate." "Deliberate?" Luca's voice was low, dangerous. Mila nodded grimly. "Someone's dumping them, probably after backyard breeding went wrong. They don't want the hassle, just throw them away like garbage." Falco, who had been lying obediently at the threshold, rose with a low growl vibrating in his chest. His hackles bristled as if he understood every word. Mila glanced down at him, her expression softening slightly. "He knows," she whispered. When Luca returned home that evening, exhausted but unable to sit still, he found himself staring at the back door again. The puppy, now named Coda at Mila's suggestion, slept curled in a makeshift bed near the fireplace. Falco sat beside it like a silent sentinel. At midnight, Luca feigned sleep, heart hammering. He watched through half-lidded eyes as Falco rose silently, padded across the living room, and sat before the door. With practiced ease, the shepherd pressed his nose against the latch, nudging and twisting with uncanny precision. The lock clicked free. Falco eased the door open with a flick of his muzzle and disappeared into the night. Luca sat up slowly, a chill trickling down his spine. Falco hadn't forgotten his training. He hadn't lost control. He was choosing to leave, choosing to hunt. And whatever he was hunting, Luca was certain now, it wasn't prey. It was a secret, a dark one, waiting somewhere out in the mist. And Falco had decided it was a secret only he could save. The following night in Alderwick wrapped itself in a dense, heavy mist, draping over the city like a burial shroud. Luca Reinhardt stood in the shadow of his modest brick house, the chill of the night biting through his jacket, his muscles stiff with tension. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind like a broken film reel. Falco, slipping silently into the darkness, returning with a battered soul cradled between his teeth. Tonight, Luca was ready. The latch on the back door had been deliberately left unlocked, the hinges oiled to silence, the porch light switched off. From his place in the gloom, he watched as Falco, every inch a trained specter, rose from his bed and padded softly to the door. With the same mechanical precision, the dog nudged the latch open and slipped outside, his black and tan body swallowed by the mist. Luca followed at a distance, his boots muffled by thick grass, his breath shallow. The night seemed to hold its own heartbeat, quick and frantic. Falco moved with purpose, cutting through backyards and alleyways with practiced ease. He headed toward Morven Heights, the gated community that rose on the hill like a fortress above the working-class streets. High stone walls crowned with iron spikes surrounded the enclave, and twin lanterns burned coldly on either side of the entrance. Falco, undeterred by such human constructs, trotted to a section where the fence dipped lower near a line of elderberry bushes. With the grace of an old soldier, he leapt, landing on the other side with barely a rustle. Luca pressed against the shadows, watching with clenched fists. Beyond the fence, Falco paused, nose to the ground, tracking something unseen. A few minutes passed before Falco reappeared, this time with another puppy in his careful grip. Even from a distance, Luca's heart twisted. The new rescue was a small creature, barely 4 months old, with a rough, brindled coat, a young Staffordshire Bull Terrier by the look of it. Its tail was a raw, jagged stump, crudely docked, the fresh wound poorly bandaged and already seeping through. Falco's movements were even gentler than usual, as he carried the injured pup back over the fence, landing with a muted thud on Luca's side of the world. From his hiding place, Luca's sharp eyes caught another movement, a figure lurking further down the tree line. The figure was small, slight, and moved with youthful clumsiness. Nolan Ash, the neighbor's boy. Nolan was 10 years old, all gangly limbs and messy brown hair perpetually falling into his bright, curious green eyes. Luca knew the boy, an only child raised by his single mother, a bank teller named Clara, after Nolan's father had disappeared years ago without a trace. The boy had grown up wary but observant, more comfortable with animals than with people, and he seemed drawn to Falco's silent heroism like a moth to flame. Nolan crouched behind a stack of firewood, his small hands fumbling with the second-hand camcorder strapped around his neck. Luca's pulse spiked with a jolt of panic. The last thing he needed was a child in the line of fire. But Nolan stayed hidden, his breath clouding in the cold as he trained his shaky lens on the fence. The boy's dedication sparked a grudging admiration in Luca. Cautiously, he gestured for Nolan to stay low, motioning toward the way home, but the boy shook his head stubbornly, refusing to abandon the unfolding mystery. Falco moved swiftly, weaving back toward the safety of home, the wounded puppy limp in his jaws. Luca followed, keeping one eye on Nolan, one eye scanning for any threat from Morven Heights. It wasn't just Falco who was risking everything now. They were all tangled in something much bigger, something seething and malignant just beneath the polished veneer of Alderwick's wealthiest families. Back at the house, Luca cleaned the puppy's injury, anger simmering under the surface. The crude amputation had been done with no anesthesia, no care, just brutal efficiency. As he bandaged the tiny leg, he caught the familiar glint of Falco's gaze, steady and knowing. He had seen worse, Luca knew. Falco had once dragged a wounded soldier out of a burning building half a world away, ignoring the bullets whizzing past his ears. Saving lives was written into Falco's bones. Later, unable to sleep, Luca reviewed the hidden cameras he had set up around his property. Small wireless models he had once used in undercover ops, now repurposed for a quieter war. His fingers flicked through the footage. Cats darting across yards, a fox sniffing at trash bins, teenagers cutting through shortcuts, the usual suburban chaos, until something made him freeze. At 3:17 a.m., a tall man in a security guard's uniform slipped into frame near the back alley behind Luca's house. The uniform was dark blue with a silver badge on the breast pocket, too distant to read, but the man's movements were deliberate. He carried a paper bag in one hand, and from it he scattered something onto the grass. Small chunks of bread or meat, dropped methodically along the route Falco had been using. A trail, a trap. The man worked quickly, glancing over his shoulder with twitchy nervousness, then disappeared back the way he had come, merging into the mist like a ghost. Luca rewound the footage, focusing on the man's face as best as the grainy resolution allowed. The security guard was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered but with a slight limp in his left leg, possibly from an old injury. His face, though mostly obscured by a cap, was square-jawed and heavy-set, with a pale complexion and a mouth set in a hard, unhappy line, the look of someone used to following orders rather than questioning them. A tight, cold knot formed in Luca's chest. Someone was not only abandoning puppies but actively trying to eliminate witnesses, even four-legged ones. Falco had been walking into a death trap every night, and somehow, miraculously, he had survived. A scratching sound made Luca turn. At the back door, Nolan stood awkwardly, cradling the camcorder against his chest like a life vest. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and his oversized jacket hung off his small frame like a forgotten coat hanger. Nolan had risked much sneaking out at this hour, but the fire in his eyes burned too bright for fear to extinguish. "I have something," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, shoving the camcorder toward Luca. Inside, as the new puppy whimpered in its sleep, Luca watched Nolan's shaky footage, Falco leaping the fence, the wounded dog dangling from his jaws, and, in the background, the faint shadow of the security guard scattering his poisoned trail. Luca rested a hand on Falco's head, feeling the dog's silent strength thrumming under his palm. The night was full of monsters hiding behind gates and marble walls, but Falco, and now, unexpectedly, Nolan, had thrown down a gauntlet. Somewhere in the fog, danger stirred and grew restless, but so did hope, and they would not walk away. Not anymore. The third night fell heavy and cold over Alderwick, with a mist that clung low to the ground and blurred the sharp edges of the world. Luca Reinhardt crouched low behind the hydrangea bushes bordering his backyard, the coarse fabric of his jacket damp with dew. His breath ghosted in the air as he stared at the small form moving through the dark. Falco, his tireless German shepherd, navigating the night with a purpose etched deep into his very bones. Tonight, Luca would not merely follow. Tonight, he would act. Falco slipped through the gap in the fence once more, his body a ripple of shadow against the silvered grass. Luca, armed with a small handheld camera tucked into his jacket and a lightweight baton at his belt, waited a full minute before creeping after him. The streets were silent, save for the distant hum of a freight train cutting across the city's edge. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, sharp and solitary. As Luca neared the wooded stretch behind Morven Heights, he spotted Falco frozen near a tangle of underbrush. The dog's body was taut with alertness, ears pricked forward, tail stiff. Luca's gut twisted. He had seen that posture before, years ago, when Falco had located IEDs buried under Afghan sands. Moving carefully, Luca advanced until he saw it, a crude metal trap, half buried in the leaf litter, its jaws rusted but deadly, and caught between its cruel teeth a small dog whimpered helplessly. The puppy was a wiry little thing, barely 6 months old, with patchy brown and white fur. It looked like a mix between a Whippet and a Jack Russell. Long, spindly legs, a fine-boned face, and fearful amber eyes. Blood matted the thin fur around its left foreleg, where the trap had snapped shut. Falco whined low in his throat, circling the trap but not daring to touch it. Luca knelt, his heart hammering. His hands worked quickly, despite the rage boiling beneath his skin. The mechanism was old but still vicious. It took careful pressure to pry the jaws apart without causing more damage. As soon as the trap loosened, Falco darted in, gently gripping the puppy by the scruff of the neck and pulling it free. Luca wrapped the trembling body in his jacket, his mind already racing ahead. Someone hadn't just abandoned these dogs. Someone was hunting them. Meanwhile, at Faur Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Mila Faur was hard at work, oblivious to the gathering storm outside. Her small, cluttered office smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She sat hunched over her battered laptop, her delicate fingers, nimble and calloused from years of field work, flipping through medical files. Mila had always been a puzzle. A young woman with an old soul shaped by betrayal back in France when a trusted superior had falsified rescue records, leaving her to shoulder the blame. The scandal had broken something inside her, trust, perhaps, but had forged in its place an ironclad loyalty to the voiceless. Tonight, she was examining the chipped shoulders and nicked ears of the puppies Luca and Falco had brought her over the past 2 nights. She frowned deeply as her gloved hands probed beneath the thin skin. Tiny scars lined the dogs' bodies, not from the streets, but from humans. What disturbed her most, however, were the faint impressions she found beneath the fur on 2 of the puppies' necks, the telltale marks where microchips had once been implanted and then crudely removed. Someone had cut them out, leaving jagged tissue behind, a butcher's handiwork performed without anesthesia. A sharp knock at the front sent Mila stiffening in her chair, her heart kicking up a notch. Pulling off her gloves, she moved toward the door, peering through the frosted glass. No one was visible, only the shifting mist and the distorted outlines of parked cars. Warily, she returned to her desk, instinct screaming that danger prowled just outside her sanctuary. Back at Luca's house, the night deepened. The rescued puppy, now named Bramble by Nolan's eager suggestion, lay curled on a heap of old towels by the radiator, whimpering softly in its sleep. Falco lay close by, every inch the vigilant guardian. Luca, meanwhile, sat before a bank of small screens set up in the den, reviewing footage from the hidden cameras he had installed along the perimeter of the woods and near Morven Heights. It was close to 2 a.m. when the motion sensor blinked to life. Luca leaned forward, his entire body tensing as the grainy black-and-white image sharpened. There, emerging from the shadows, was a figure, heavy-set, cloaked in a long trench coat despite the mild weather. The man moved with an economy of motion that spoke of familiarity, as if he had done this ritual countless times. In his arms, the man carried a battered steel cage. The camera's low-resolution feed couldn't capture details, but Luca could make out small frantic movements inside the cage, shapes writhing and pushing against the bars. The man reached the edge of the woods, near the overgrown ditch where city maintenance rarely ventured. With a grunt, he hurled the cage into the underbrush as casually as one might discard a bag of trash. The metallic clang echoed faintly in the night. Without hesitation, the man turned and disappeared back toward the affluent glow of Morven Heights. Luca froze the footage and zoomed in, the grain distorting into a mess of static and shapes. But there, just barely visible, was a glint of silver hair under the hood and the flash of a heavy signet ring catching the moonlight. Richard Morven. The name struck Luca like a hammer blow to the chest. Richard Morven, the untouchable titan of Alderwick's high society, a man who owned half the luxury properties on the hill and who sponsored countless charity galas and civic events. His influence seeped into every corner of city politics. For years, Luca had heard whispers of dirty dealings, but nothing provable, until now. Luca sat back heavily in his chair, running a hand down his weary face. His mind raced ahead, how to build the case, how to gather irrefutable evidence. He would need Mila, and he would need to protect Nolan, who had already seen too much. Most of all, he would need Falco, the dog who refused to look away when the world turned dark. As Bramble stirred fitfully in his sleep, Luca rose and crossed the room, kneeling beside Falco. The shepherd lifted his head, his intelligent brown eyes locking with Luca's, full of silent understanding. "We're not just saving puppies anymore," Luca murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "We're going to tear their whole rotten kingdom down." Outside, the mist thickened, rolling in waves across the quiet streets. The war for Alderwick's soul had begun. The rain came down in thin, needling sheets that evening, stitching the night together with silver threads. Luca Reinhardt crouched low behind the skeletal remains of a collapsed stone wall at the outskirts of the Morven Heights estate. The hood of his jacket pulled low over his brow, the cold seeping into his bones. Beside him, Falco waited, every muscle tense beneath his glistening black and tan coat, breath fogging softly in the chilled air. A few yards away, a battered blue hatchback idled under the thick canopy of elder trees. Behind the wheel sat Dr. Mila Faure, her slender hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her sharp green eyes narrowed and watching. Mila wore her usual uniform of a thick cable-knit sweater and worn jeans, her chestnut hair pulled into a practical braid. She had long ago learned that trust was a currency easily betrayed. Tonight, she carried herself with the steely calm of someone who had been burned and survived. She was the unseen support to Luca's forward advance, ready to provide sanctuary should things go wrong. Luca's eyes never left the lone figure moving cautiously through the rain-slick clearing ahead. The woman was slight, no taller than Luca's shoulder, wrapped in a gray waterproof poncho that billowed with every gust of wind. Her gait was careful, almost furtive, a lumpy rusted metal cage swinging from her gloved hand. Every few steps she paused and glanced over her shoulder, her fear a palpable thing, drawn tight around her like a noose. When she reached the thickest part of the woods near the boundary fence, Luca moved. Silent as a hunting cat, he closed the distance, one hand slipping to the baton at his belt more from habit than necessity. Falco flanked him naturally, the two moving in eerie synchronicity. As the woman leaned down to abandon the cage, Luca's voice cut through the darkness, low and commanding. "Don't move." The woman froze instantly, the cage slipping from her trembling fingers with a metallic clatter. She spun around, her face stark under the moonlight, a narrow face lined deeply with years of quiet suffering, her blue eyes wide and hollow with panic. She was perhaps 50, though hardship had aged her prematurely, her graying blonde hair escaping from under a soaked woolen cap. There was something fragile about her, like an old paper map folding in on itself. "I'm not here to hurt you," Luca said, keeping his posture non-threatening. "I just need to talk." Falco moved closer to the cage, sniffing. Inside, two puppies huddled together, their small bodies wet and shivering, one of them, a black and white spaniel mix, letting out a pitiful whine. Mila appeared a moment later, her footsteps careful, her face guarded but not unkind. The woman sagged as if her strings had been cut. She brought shaking hands to her face, biting down on a sob that threatened to escape. Her name, they soon learned, was Celine Barr, caretaker of the Morven Estate's breeding kennels, and the reluctant hand behind countless acts of cruelty. Celine spoke in fits and starts, the words tumbling from her cracked lips like broken glass. She had come from a poor village in northern Wales, recruited by Richard Morven himself, with promises of a steady wage and safe housing. In her youth, Celine had once dreamed of working with animals, but Morven's employment had taught her brutal lessons instead. Only the perfect were kept, sleek, strong, symmetrical. Dogs destined for show rings and bloodlines worth thousands. The others, those born with twisted paws, with off-color markings, with timid spirits, they were ordered to be removed. Luca exchanged a grim look with Mila as Celine spoke. Falco remained near the cage, his presence steadying, the puppies inside slowly calming under his watchful gaze. Meanwhile, across town, Nolan Ash sat sullenly at the kitchen table of their cramped townhouse, picking listlessly at the cold shepherd's pie on his plate. His mother, Clara Ash, a woman of sturdy build and pinched features, stood over him with arms crossed, her brown eyes flashing with rare anger. Clara was a survivor, shaped by a husband who had vanished without a trace a decade ago, leaving her to raise a son alone on a meager bank clerk salary. Her experience had bred caution into every fiber of her being. "You're not to sneak out at night again, Nolan," she snapped. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in." "But Mom," Nolan tried, his voice small but urgent. "Falco's saving them. Someone has to help." "I don't care if Falco's rescuing unicorns," Clara said sharply, the fear she refused to name leaking into her anger. "You're a child, and children don't fight monsters." Nolan dropped his gaze, feeling the words like slaps, but deep down, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Later that night, while Clara slept fitfully on the couch, Nolan quietly packed his old camcorder, a notebook, and a flashlight into his school bag. Falco needed him. Luca needed him. He couldn't turn his back now. Back in the woods, Luca pressed Celine gently but firmly for more. Tears carved tracks through the grime on her cheeks as she revealed the final, sickening detail. Deep within the Morven estate, hidden behind a concealed door in the basement, was a place known among the staff as the White Cellar. There, the worst of the defective dogs were confined. No one heard barking from the White Cellar, only silence. And when dogs entered, they never returned. Luca felt bile rise in his throat, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Beside him, Mila stood frozen, her face pale and stricken beneath the street lamp's thin light. "How do we get inside?" Luca asked, voice hard. Celine hesitated, fear flickering across her face like a candle about to gutter out. Then, slowly, she slipped a tarnished brass key from the pocket of her poncho, pressing it into Luca's palm with trembling fingers. "He locks it. Always. But I made a copy. I couldn't—" She broke off, choking on her own shame. "I couldn't live with it anymore." Luca closed his fingers around the key, his gaze steady. "You did the right thing," he said. "No," Celine whispered, tears spilling freely now. "The right thing would have been never staying in the first place." As Mila wrapped a gentle arm around Celine's shoulders and guided her toward the waiting car, Luca bent beside Falco, running a hand through the thick ruff of fur at the shepherd's neck. "We're going to end this," he murmured. Above them, the sky cracked with distant thunder, and somewhere deep within the fortress of Morven Heights, a white door stood waiting, guarding horrors that could no longer stay hidden. The night pressed thick against Alderwick, a suffocating shroud of mist and unseen eyes. Luca Reinhardt moved like a shadow along the rear service path of Morven Heights. The brass key Celine had given him cool and heavy in his jacket pocket. Falco trotted at his side, his powerful frame blending seamlessly into the gloom, every sense honed and crackling with tension. Tonight, they would step beyond the line of whispered rumors and gather undeniable proof of the horrors hidden within the Morven estate. The old delivery door yielded to the copied key with a reluctant groan, its hinges dry from disuse. Luca slipped inside, his flashlight muted beneath a layer of dark cloth, casting only the faintest glow as they entered a narrow corridor lined with crates and cleaning supplies. The sterile scent of bleach hung heavily in the air, barely masking a metallic tang that made Luca's stomach churn. They descended a steep stairwell into the bowels of the mansion, the sound of Falco's careful footfalls a steady reassurance against the growing sense of dread. At the bottom of the stairs, a steel door loomed, featureless except for a small keypad and a heavy latch. Luca inserted the second key Celine had given him, murmuring a prayer beneath his breath. The lock clicked open with a heavy thunk, and the door swung inward. The basement beyond was colder than the night outside, lit only by a single, flickering, fluorescent tube. The air was wet, heavy, thick with the stink of urine, blood, and something worse, fear. Rows of iron cages lined the walls, their bars stained and rusted. The concrete floor was slick and dark in patches, and here and there were shallow depressions in the surface, stains that no amount of scrubbing had erased. Falco stiffened beside Luca, his lips curling back from his teeth in a silent snarl. The shepherd's hackles bristled, but he made no sound, his training holding him steady. Luca swept the flashlight across the cages, heart pounding. Inside the first few, he found nothing but remnants, frayed collars, claw marks gouged deep into metal, and bones so small and brittle they hardly seemed real. But further in, huddled in the farthest corner, were 3 survivors. The puppies were a heartbreaking sight. The largest, a golden retriever mix with patches of missing fur and visible ribs, lifted its head weakly at their approach, eyes clouded with exhaustion and terror. Beside it, a tiny black terrier shivered uncontrollably, pressing itself against the retriever's side. The third was smaller still, a pitiful scrap of brindled fur and protruding bone, barely breathing. Luca knelt, speaking in a low, soothing murmur as he worked to open the cage. Falco sat close, his posture protective but non-threatening. The retriever struggled to its feet, staggering forward, but the terrier whimpered and backed deeper into the shadows. As Luca reached inside, the brindled puppy lunged without warning, its tiny jaws clamping down on his hand with surprising strength. Pain flared up Luca's arm, but he didn't pull back. He let the puppy thrash and bite, letting it exhaust itself rather than risking more injury. Only after long, agonizing seconds did the puppy release him, collapsing in a heap of trembles and shallow breaths. Falco moved in then, lying flat on the cold floor, inching forward until his nose touched the brindled pup's side. He exhaled a low, rumbling whine, a sound Luca had heard only once before, when Falco had mourned the death of a fallen comrade. The puppy, sensing something different, something safe, whimpered and nuzzled weakly against Falco's muzzle. Luca bandaged his hand quickly, hissing at the sting. His heart ached more than the wound itself. What these dogs had suffered was unspeakable. The cages, the filth, the silence. This was systematic, practiced cruelty. In the center of the room stood a large white porcelain bathtub, its rim chipped and stained. Beside it, a battered 5-gallon bucket half-filled with murky water sat ready, and nearby, a stack of folded towels lay like a silent, chilling suggestion. Luca didn't need anyone to tell him what this setup was intended for. He could see it in every careful, heartless detail. This was no accident. This was an execution chamber disguised as a kennel. Falco helped herd the puppies gently toward the door, nudging them along with infinite patience. Luca scooped up the smallest, tucking the fragile body against his chest. They needed to get out, fast. The evidence would be documented later. Right now, survival came first. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Mila Faure paced the cramped break room of her clinic, her pulse still hammering from the anonymous letter she had found taped to her front door. The paper had been cheap, the handwriting an impatient scrawl, "Stay out of Morven business if you value your clinic." Mila's hands trembled as she reread it for the third time. Her heart screamed to call Luca, to warn him, but she hesitated. If she panicked now, if she drew attention, she might endanger him. And the dogs. The memory of being set up years ago in Lyon, abandoned by those she trusted, gnawed at her. She would not make the same mistakes again. Her green eyes hardened, and she grabbed her old veterinary bag from behind the counter, loading it with supplies. Antibiotics, syringes, dressings. Whatever happened tonight, she would be ready. Back beneath Morven's estate, Luca and Falco moved swiftly, keeping low, every nerve straining for sounds of discovery. They slipped back through the service corridors, Falco guiding the puppies with soft nudges and low, coaxing whines. The building above them slept uneasily, but it slept. As they emerged into the service alley, Luca's blood went cold. A black SUV idled at the far end of the alley, headlights off, engine humming low. A figure leaned casually against the hood, his silhouette sharp and unmistakable even in the dark. It was Philip Crane, Richard Morven's personal enforcer, a thick-set man with a wrestler's build, a broken nose badly set, and a smile like a cracked blade. Philip had once been a promising boxer in his youth, but a bar fight gone wrong had shattered his career, leaving him with a limp and a savage temper. Rumor had it Morven picked him up cheap, loyalty bought for the price of dignity. Luca ducked back behind the trash bins, heart racing. Falco froze, instinctively shielding the puppies. Luca pressed a calming hand to Falco's side, weighing options fast. Philip's presence confirmed what Luca had suspected. Morven wasn't just hiding cruelty, he was guarding it like a dragon hoarding gold. A sharp whistle pierced the night, and Philip tossed something shiny into the air, a key fob, before catching it lazily. He didn't move toward the building, not yet. He was waiting, perhaps for someone else, perhaps for orders. Luca exhaled slowly. They had minutes, at best. With Falco leading the way and the puppies stumbling after, they slipped down a narrow side passage and out into the night, vanishing into the mist. Tonight, they had survived. But the war was far from over. The river that snaked past the edges of Alderwick had always been a forgotten thing, choked with reeds and debris, a place where the city turned its back. Tonight, under the pale, broken light of a waxing moon, it bore grim witness once again. Luca Reinhardt moved silently along the muddy bank, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. Falco was ahead of him, nose low, weaving through the tangle of reeds with sharp, practiced motions. The mist that clung to the ground smelled of decay and wet stone, and Luca knew, in the marrow of his bones, that Falco had found something important. A soft whimper rose above the rush of the river, barely audible. Falco surged forward, his powerful body disappearing into the mist. Luca followed, heart hammering against his ribs. He found Falco crouched near a cluster of driftwood and trash, nudging something with infinite gentleness. As Luca approached, the shapes resolved into a heartbreaking scene. A cardboard box, soaked through and sagging, tucked among the reeds. Inside, 5 tiny bodies writhed feebly, gasping for warmth and air. The puppies were pitifully small, no more than a few weeks old. Their fur was matted and filthy, skin stretched too tightly over brittle bones. One had already stopped moving. its body still and cold. Falco whined deep in his throat, pushing his nose against the others, urging them to live. As Luca gently lifted the box, something caught his eye. One of the pups was different. Unlike the others, brown, black, or brindled, this one shimmered strangely under the moonlight. Its fur was a peculiar shade of silver-white, almost metallic, a rare genetic anomaly he had seen only once before during his K-9 unit years. Such a dog, if healthy, could have fetched a fortune. But defects, even beautiful ones, were unwelcome in the ruthless world of purebred breeding. Falco circled close, his body a protective wall against the night. Luca tucked the box against his chest and turned toward the faint lights of the city, feeling the weight of another secret nestle against his heart. Meanwhile, across town, Nolan Ash sat cross-legged on the floor of his bedroom, the weak glow of a flashlight illuminating a crumpled sheet of paper spread out before him. He had found it earlier that day while snooping near the Morven estate's trash bins, crammed between torn receipts and empty feed bags. The paper was damp, the ink slightly smeared, but the logo at the top was unmistakable. The Morven Heights Kennels, embossed in gold. The document listed a series of numbers and brief descriptions, all cold and clinical. P4, undersized, limp. P5, incorrect coat pattern. P7, skittish behavior. Next to each line, a single damning note, scheduled for removal. Sat 2 a.m. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. He knew what removal meant. Now. He had seen it in the bruised bodies Falco dragged home and the hollow broken dogs Mila stitched back together. Rage, sharp and blinding, bubbled up inside him. His mother's warnings echoed in his ears, but he pushed them aside. He pulled out his battered camcorder and began packing a small backpack. Extra batteries, a notepad, a pen, his flashlight. If Luca needed help, Nolan would not be sitting safely at home this time. At the 4 veterinary clinic, Dr. Mila 4 worked deep into the night, her small hands steady despite the exhaustion that gnawed at her bones. The rescued puppies from the river now slept in warmed kennels, wrapped in heated blankets, IV drips feeding life back into their tiny veins. Mila moved from kennel to kennel, her face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. She paused beside the silver-furred pup, gently stroking its head with one finger. Its breathing was shallow but even. She frowned, noticing a small lump just behind its left shoulder, a familiar shape beneath the skin. Mila's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Moving quickly, she fetched the microchip scanner from the supply closet and swept it over the puppy's body. The device beeped. She stared at the screen, the world narrowing to the simple, damning numbers flashing there. The chip was active, and the registered owner was not Morven Heights Kennels. It was the Alderwick City Animal Control Office. Mila stumbled back a step, the scanner clattering from her hand onto the tile floor. She gripped the edge of the counter, nausea rising. It wasn't just Morven. Somewhere, somehow, official hands had been helping to funnel these undesirables away from the system, turning a blind eye while the unwanted were quietly erased. The realization left her trembling. A lifetime of believing in systems, in rules meant to protect the innocent, crumbled to dust inside her. She thought of the anonymous warning letter, the chilling precision of it, and now she understood. They weren't just warning her to protect Morven's secrets. They were protecting something larger, something rooted deep within the very foundations of Alderwick itself. Mila pulled out her phone with shaking fingers, dialing Luca's number, praying he wasn't too deep into danger already. Back at the riverbank, Luca crouched near the patrol car parked discreetly among the abandoned lots. He and Falco worked quickly to dry the surviving puppies, using old blankets and heat packs stashed in the back of the vehicle. Falco moved tirelessly between them, licking, nudging, warming the tiny bodies with his own. The silver pup whimpered softly, its delicate body quivering in Luca's arms. The phone buzzed against Luca's thigh. He shifted the puppy carefully and answered. "Mila," he said, voice tight with fatigue. "You need to listen." Mila's voice was low, urgent, almost broken. "The chip on the silver pup, it's registered to city control, not Morven. They're all in on it, Luca. It's bigger than we thought." For a long moment, Luca said nothing, the river whispering dark secrets at his back. He stared out across the water, his free hand tightening into a fist. Alderwick, his city, had rotted from the inside out, the corruption weaving through the very people sworn to protect its creatures and its citizens alike. "We're burning the whole system down," he said quietly. "We have to," Mila whispered. "There's no one else who will." Luca ended the call and turned to Falco. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes sharp, unyielding. Luca scratched behind his ears, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath the thick fur. "Not just Morven anymore, boy," he said. "This is war." From the mist beyond the river, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the land, a dark herald of the battles to come. And Luca, Falco, Mila, even young Nolan, would be the spark that set the shadows ablaze. The hour was close to 2 in the morning when Luca Reinhardt crouched behind the low retaining wall bordering the service yard of Morven Heights Kennels, his breath misting in the chill air. The city around them slept obliviously, but here, in this small forgotten pocket of Alderwick, war was about to be waged. Falco sat at his side, a hulking shadow of disciplined tension, every line of his powerful body brimming with anticipation. The German shepherd's dark eyes never wavered from the battered side door leading into the kennel's heart. The door, Céline Barre, would soon open from within. Luca shifted his weight, feeling the familiar weight of his old service pistol holstered beneath his jacket, the badge he hadn't worn in 2 years tucked into his belt as if it could still shield him. Technically, he had no authority anymore, but right and wrong had never needed a badge. The police team waiting nearby had been assembled carefully, men and women he trusted, hand-picked from the few who hadn't been rotted by the city's political disease. Among them was Officer Daniel Reeve, a grizzled man with a face like crumpled leather and a permanent squint, his wiry frame deceptively quick. Daniel had once dragged Luca out of a burning meth house in East Alderwick, and his loyalty remained stubborn and fierce. Another was Sergeant Maeve Holloway, a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her early 40s, with hair chopped ruthlessly short and a no-nonsense glare. Maeve had grown up in Alderwick's poorest district, clawing her way up through sheer grit. Betrayal was something she neither gave nor forgave. The plan was simple and brutally efficient. Catch Richard Morven red-handed during his weekly clean-out, the so-called removal of the defectives he considered unworthy of profit. Céline, terrified but determined, had agreed to unlock the service entrance once Richard and his hired hands had begun moving the cages. A faint metallic click echoed across the yard. Luca stiffened, hand dropping instinctively toward his weapon. A moment later, the service door cracked open, and a slim figure slipped into the gap. Céline, wrapped in a dark hoodie, her face barely visible under the low brim of a borrowed cap. She gave a quick, shaky nod. Then Falco moved, a low, almost inaudible growl vibrating through his chest as he slunk forward, Luca following. Inside, the kennels were a nightmare of sound and smell, the desperate whines and barks of caged dogs mixing with the acrid stench of bleach, blood, and fear. Ahead, under the harsh glare of industrial lamps, Richard Morven stood with his back to them, barking clipped orders to 2 younger men hefting cages into a black, unmarked van. Richard wore his usual arrogance like a tailored suit. A heavy trench coat over crisp slacks, a silver signet ring glinting on his right hand. His hair, once proud and silver, was now slicked back harshly, and his mouth twisted in permanent disdain. Without hesitation, Lucas stepped into the open, voice sharp. "Step away from the cages, Richard." Everything froze. One of the hired men dropped a cage with a metallic crash, the dogs inside yelping in panic. Richard turned slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Richard moved. A sleek black pistol appeared from beneath his coat, rising fast. Falco was faster. The German shepherd launched himself forward, intercepting the gunman's line of fire with a blur of muscle and fury. The shot cracked through the air, deafening in the confined space. Lucas saw Falco jerk midair, a dark line slashing across his neck, but the shepherd landed heavily, teeth sinking into Richard's wrist and sending the weapon skittering across the concrete. Luca lunged, pinning Richard to the ground with practiced efficiency, wrenching his arms behind his back as Maeve and Daniel stormed in behind him. Cuffs snapped closed with a satisfying finality. Falco staggered upright, blood matting the thick ruff around his neck, but his eyes were bright, defiant, unbroken. "Get him out," Luca barked to Maeve, jerking his head at Richard, who sneered but didn't resist. "Now." Meanwhile, outside, Dr. Mila Fowler clutched her phone tightly, her face illuminated by the screen as she live-streamed the entire operation to an audience of thousands. Dressed in a simple navy raincoat with her hair pinned back, Mila looked every inch the poised professional, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her voice low and even as she narrated the rescue, panning her camera over the battered cages, the frightened dogs, the blood staining the floor. The comments flooded in, a rising tide of outrage and support. "Save them! Shut Morven down! How can the city allow this?" Mila's hands trembled slightly, but she held steady. Tonight the world would see. Tonight, Alderwick's darkest secrets would burn under the scrutiny of millions. Luca knelt beside Falco once the chaos had ebbed, examining the injury with shaking hands. The bullet had grazed along the outer flesh of Falco's neck. Bloody, but superficial. Relief hit Luca so hard he had to grip the shepherd's shoulders to stay grounded. "You damn fool," Luca whispered, voice thick. Falco huffed a soft, ragged breath, pressing his broad head against Luca's chest, the bond between them stronger than any words. As the last cage was loaded into the transport vans, dogs yipping and howling but alive, Nolan appeared at the edge of the yard, his small form hunched against the rain, his backpack slung over one skinny shoulder. Luca caught the boy's eye and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the courage it had taken for him to come. Across the street, cameras flashed as news vans began to arrive, drawn by Mila's viral broadcast. Officer Daniel clapped Luca on the shoulder, his weathered face breaking into a rare grin. "You did good, Reinhardt," he said. "You and that mutt of yours." Luca smiled grimly, watching as Richard Morven was shoved into the back of a squad car, his pale face twisted with impotent rage. This battle was won, but the war against the city's corrupt heart, against the officials who had allowed this rot to fester, was only just beginning. As Falco sat tall beside him, the rain washing the blood from his fur, Luca felt something bloom in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Thin, battered, stubborn, but alive. The courtroom was packed on the morning Richard Morven stood trial. Rows of journalists crowded the narrow benches, cameras flashing like heat lightning behind the heavy oak doors. Luca Reinhardt sat near the back, Falco lying patiently at his feet, a faint line of pink visible under the dark fur on his neck where the bullet graze was still healing. Beside them, Dr. Mila Fauer leaned forward in her seat, her small frame rigid with tension, her green eyes never leaving the proceedings. Richard Morven looked diminished now. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit, his silver hair dull and limp, his sharp features sagging under the weight of public disgrace. His expensive lawyers had fought hard to dismiss the charges, but the mountain of evidence was too overwhelming. Documented animal abuse, bribery of public officials, manipulation of veterinary records. Testimonies from former employees, including Celine Barr, painted a picture so grotesque it shocked even the jaded city officials who had once counted Richard among their own. The judge, a stooped man with a stern mouth and white eyebrows like snowy cliffs, showed no mercy. Sentencing would follow, but everyone in that room already knew. Richard Morven's empire was finished. Later that afternoon, outside the crumbling remains of what had once been Morven Heights kennels, the wind carried a different sound. Laughter, barking, the shuffle of new beginnings. The city had moved quickly after the scandal exploded. The seized property had been transformed into something new. The Alderwick Haven for rescued dogs, funded by public donations and managed by people who had bled to save those lives. Celine Barr stood at the gates, clipboard in hand, calling out instructions to a cluster of volunteers. She wore a neat uniform now, dark jeans, a soft blue polo with the Haven's crest embroidered over her heart, and though her lined face still bore the traces of old regrets, there was a lightness to her now, a purposeful dignity. She had finally found redemption, one small act of kindness at a time. Inside the main courtyard, Nolan Ash, dressed in his best shirt and pressed pants, fidgeted nervously as a representative from the Alderwick Animal Welfare League pinned a medal to his chest. The crowd burst into applause, flashes popping as local news crews captured the moment. Nolan's brown hair stuck up stubbornly in the breeze, and his wide green eyes shone with a mix of pride and embarrassment. Standing beside Nolan was a dog, a sleek young German shepherd with glossy black fur, alert ears, and a playful bounce to his steps. Valor, as Nolan had named him, was one of the puppies Falco had rescued from the White Cellar. Once emaciated and trembling, the pup was now all muscle and joy, bounding around Nolan with obvious devotion. Luca watched the ceremony from a quiet corner of the yard, Falco sitting beside him. A faint smile tugged at Luca's weathered mouth as he took it all in. The celebration, the life that had clawed its way back from darkness. It wasn't victory, not completely, but it was something close. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "You did this, you know," Mila said, stepping up beside him, her eyes warm beneath the brim of her cap. She had traded her clinic scrubs for a simple navy jacket and jeans, a more relaxed look that suited the new weight she carried, not of fear, but of hope. "We did," Luca corrected, scratching Falco behind the ears. "All of us." Mila smiled, her face lighting up in a way Luca rarely saw, unguarded, genuine. "Well, you're not getting rid of us now. We need a consultant for the Haven, someone who knows how to deal with scared dogs, and scared people." Luca chuckled under his breath, feeling an unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest. "Consultant, huh? Sounds official." "You'll love it," Mila said, bumping her shoulder against his lightly, "and besides, Falco's practically staff already." At the mention of his name, Falco lifted his head proudly, his thick tail thudding against the ground. Word had spread quickly across the city about the injured dog who had fought to save the helpless, the one who had bled to protect his human. Children called him the city's night watcher. Adults who had long since lost their belief in heroes found it again, embodied not in capes but in a scarred shepherd who refused to back down. Days turned to weeks, and the haven grew. Dogs, once slated for death, found homes. Laughter filled the once haunted halls, and Nolan became a permanent fixture at the rescue center, volunteering after school with Valor always at his side. One late afternoon, as the autumn sun melted into molten gold over Alderwick, Luca sat on a bench in the haven's main courtyard, watching Valor chase falling leaves. Beside him, Falco stretched out lazily, his body relaxed but his eyes forever alert. Valor barreled into Falco with a playful yip, and the older dog accepted the assault with a long-suffering grunt, rolling onto his side so the younger pup could climb over him triumphantly. It became a routine. Each evening, Valor would curl up against Falco's side, their breathing sinking into one slow, peaceful rhythm. Watching them, Luca thought of battles fought and scars earned, of loss and survival and second chances. "You raised a good one," Nolan said, plopping down beside Luca, dirt smudged across his knees from an afternoon of chasing dogs. His voice was proud and a little shy. Luca rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, giving it a firm, approving squeeze. "No, kid," he said, voice low. "You did." Across the yard, Mila laughed as she tried, unsuccessfully, to corral a trio of excitable puppies into the play area. Celine, clipboard tucked under one arm, shook her head fondly, her steps light as she moved to help. In that moment, the fractures in all their lives seemed to heal a little more. Hope didn't come in grand, sweeping gestures. It came in muddy paw prints on clean floors, in wagging tails, in the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog, between a broken soldier and a shepherd who refused to give up. The world outside still turned in cruelty and greed, but here, in this small pocket of Alderwick, something stronger had taken root, and as Falco closed his eyes, Valor pressed against his side, Luca leaned back on the bench, exhaling a slow breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a distant memory. It felt like coming home. Sometimes miracles don't come with trumpets or grand spectacles. Sometimes they come in the soft breath of a wounded puppy finally finding warmth, in the steady heartbeat of a loyal dog refusing to abandon the broken, in the courage of a boy who dares to stand up for those without a voice, in the quiet persistence of people who choose compassion over comfort. In the story of Luca, Falco, Nolan, Mila, and the countless lives they saved, we are reminded that God's miracles often arrive through the hands and hearts of ordinary people. It is through our small acts of courage, kindness, and faith that He weaves hope back into a world desperate for light. Just like the rain that washed the blood from Falco's fur, or the battered kennel that became a sanctuary, healing begins when we believe that no life is too small to matter, and no battle is too great when fought with love. In our own daily lives, we are offered the same choice: to walk past suffering or to stop, to kneel, to lift, to save, to become vessels of grace in an often graceless world. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can be the spark of a miracle, if you believe that God calls us to guard the least among us, then be part of that miracle today. Share this story to spread awareness. Comment below with the name of a dog, a cat, or any soul that ever touched your heart. Subscribe to our channel to be part of a growing family that believes in hope, in healing, and in the beautiful, unstoppable power of compassion. And may the Lord bless you richly, keep you strong, and guide you always, as you become a light for those still waiting to be saved. May God watch over every heart that beats for the helpless, and may He bless every hand that dares to lift another.